Welcome to Niagara Falls, the Horseshoe Falls, the place where daredevils make their dreams come true and go over the rainbow.
3, let's go, Audrey. Let's 1, 2, 3, let's go.
For centuries, folks have tried to conquer the Niagara Falls, that is the Horseshoe Falls. Whether they be crazy or whether they just be brave. Some have succeeded and some, well, have not succeeded. God, I love Niagara.
I have a question for you. What do you know about Niagara?
It has a really big falls.
I have a question for you. Do you like history?
So let me ask you, is that a rhetorical question? Okay, so we were talking about the more obscure places in Niagara. Some of the coolest history is not even in Niagara Falls.
Historical Niagara rocks!
What else do you have to say for yourself?
Good morning, I'm Donald, and I'm all about history.
And I'm all about the base. The base. If you're born, raised, or visit Niagara, you're always from Niagara. One of the greatest places on Earth. For decades, if not centuries, humans have been trying to beat and conquer nature. That includes the great Niagara Falls. Is God looking down on us and saying, good luck with that?
Well, it's not the highest falls, because Angel Falls is the highest. It's not the widest falls. I mean, Victoria Falls is much wider than that. But it certainly is probably the most well-known falls. And I think that that's a really good case of being able to sell your product, because that's what it is. It's a tourist attraction.
Niagara Falls continues to be one of the wonders of the world that people by the tens of thousands visit each year. Standing at a height of 51 meters, the Horseshoe Falls is the Niagara region's geological centerpiece. Throughout the year, whether it be by the Maid of the Mist or the Hornblower, folks get to experience a close encounter with the base of the falls. Throughout history, there have been those who have had other designs on how to get a little closer to the falls. Some decided to walk over it. And then there are some that decided to ride over it. And then there were those, the majority, that thought the best way to go over the falls was by barrel. And then there was Robert Overcracker, who decided to jet ski over the falls, to his death. Over the years, those who have challenged the falls have met their demise for the most part.
Daredevils are legacy makers in our history books, because I think it, in some ways, appeals to all of us. You know, for example, I am not a daredevil, but I have many daredevils in my ancestry. And one would almost think, you know, the genetic tie would come down to me, but it hasn't. But at the same time, I would love to be a daredevil. I'd love to have that curiosity and that excitement and that zest for living, you know. I consider even people that climb Mount Everest, they're daredevils, people that just do unusual things that most of us, I think, would step back and say, I don't know if I want to do that, it looks dangerous. So yeah, I think they do leave quite a legacy, and I think we can really admire them. You know, we can also think maybe they were a little foolish, but wow, they were so brave.
Over the centuries, some have viewed the actual Niagara Falls as a challenge. There is something, dare I say, daring about Niagara's Horseshoe Falls. Whether it be Bobby Leach, who was the second person to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel in 1911, or Annie Edison Taylor, the first person to survive the barrel plunge on her 63rd birthday in 1901. Do you believe in miracles? Well, when one happens as big as the Niagara Falls, it is definitely worth mentioning in the history books. You see, on July 9th, 1960, 7-year-old Roger Woodward and his sister were out on a boat on the upper Niagara River after their father took them out for the day. Unfortunately, the boat capsized and 7-year-old Roger Woodward was swept over the 188-foot drop of the falls, and he survived. His sister Deanne, then 17, was rescued near the brink of the falls. Later, Woodward would revisit Niagara Falls with his kids.
From the time I was a little girl, my uncle always told me that we had a famous ancestor who had walked Niagara Falls on a tightrope and fell to his death. So when I was older and became a genealogist and started looking into the family history, I discovered my uncle was correct. In 1887, my ancestor Stephen Peer walked Niagara Falls successfully, apparently on a much thinner cable than anyone else had ever walked it. He had been Bellini's assistant for some years and had been messing around with Bellini's equipment. And Bellini apparently, according to newspaper articles, Bellini was not very thrilled with that. And when Stephen had tried to make his first amateurish walk using Bellini's equipment, Bellini, again, this is all according to newspaper accounts of the day, Bellini had tried to loosen the cables so that Stephen would fall. Now, the crowd was not very happy about this, so they apparently restrained Bellini, and Stephen was very well received. And then that was before he made his actual successful walk all the way across Niagara. So he had made this successful walk. He created flyers calling himself Professor Peer, and was planning future walks. About 3 days later, after his successful walk, he was celebrating in the Elgin House Hotel. And again, according to newspaper accounts, was rather tipsy. Some strangers came in and asked him to talk with them because they had plans to feature him in other walks, I am assuming over other falls or other places. So this was in the early evening. So he went with them down to the falls and never returned. When his brother went looking for him later, he found him dead at the bottom of the gorge. Then it becomes a kind of a mystery that has never been solved. Was it murder? Was it an accident? Or was it suicide? The coroner's verdict and his official death certificate says it was suicide while of unsound mind, but his family never believed that. I don't really believe it either, because Stephen had just made a very successful walk, was really pleased with what was going to happen in the future. No reason to kill himself. So his family believed that Bellini had hired men to do him in, and no one knows.
We have a section, a stunter section they call it. We have Anson Taylor, and she was the first person to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel and survive. She was 62 when she did it in 1901.
Annie Taylor just wanted to drum up some retirement money by becoming the Queen of the Mist. You see, her motives were purely driven by financial gain, but unfortunately, she never did become rich in going over the falls. Years later, in 1953, another woman, a starlet, would be the star of the falls. The great Marilyn Monroe would appear in the classic movie Niagara.
My ancestor, Stephen Peer, the tightrope walker, had a cousin who was named Harmon Pier. And Harmon was apparently a bit of a rogue. And Harmon used to jump off of ships' masts and just off the side of ships just to get some money from onlookers. And he decided that he would jump off the suspension bridge at Niagara, fastened to a cable. So his cousin, Stephen, the tightrope walker, drummed up a crowd and entertained them with running up and down the girders and balancing along the railing of the bridge, you know, getting the crowd quite worked up in anticipation of Harmon's leap off the bridge. So there are many newspaper articles about Harmon, and one of them describes what he was wearing, which I think is really kind of cool. And the description in the newspaper accounts of what Harmon was wearing was that he was wearing tights. He had elastic band type pieces of rubber fastened around his ankles and around his thighs. And that would keep his legs, of course, tight when he jumped in because he was going feet first. And he had sponges stuffed in his nose, his ears, and his mouth. And he also had apparently a very huge rubber life raft, sort of from his thighs up to his armpits. And then he had suspenders. I'm assuming they held that. And then he had a cable attached to the back, and he jumped. And it was very successful. I believe he jumped 192 feet. Anyway, it was very successful. The crowd was thrilled. So they, you know, passed around the hat or the bucket or whatever they passed and collected money. And he agreed to do another jump. It was in early July when he was going to do another jump, and this was in 1879. So when he showed up for the second jump, he was very drunk and refused to jump. So the crowd was quite angry because they'd already given their money. So Harmon and his cousin, the tightrope walker, had to flee because the crowd was going crazy. They wanted their money back. And he tried to make other jumps from the Niagara Bridge, but he never completed any more because either he was too drunk or he just realized this is really stupid.
I wrote this book about William Redhill Sr. and discovered not only about his daredeviling and his pals, but that he was quite a rescuer. And he's, I think, still the only man in Canada to have 4 life-saving medals awarded to him. But he always respected the falls. He was a safety man for a number of daredevilers, including Charles Stevens in 1920, Bobby Leach earlier on, and Jean Lucier in 1928. But Redhill Sr. thought going over the falls in a barrel was a fool's game. He never attempted it himself. Unfortunately, he put some pressure on his sons to outdo the old man. The old man, Redhill Sr., was like the first daredevil, the first rescuer of Niagara Falls. He brought big headlines in Europe about his barreling down the rapids, although he never went over the falls. So Major Hill and Redhill Jr. felt this intense pressure to live up to the old man, and they wanted to go over Niagara Falls barrels. Major got stuck near the hydro intake. He probably would have died because his barrel was already damaged when the police pulled him out. Red Jr. infamously went in the Thing, 13 inner tubes tied with fishnet. And if anyone knew the falls, it should have been Red Jr. But I think he was dead before he went over the falls because he was in a contraption which weighed less than him, and he should have known better that the first bumping around in the upper rapids, anything inside the barrel that weighs more than the barrel is going to get chucked out. And his barrel was a mess, I think, already falling apart when it went over the falls. So it's kind of a sad legacy, but looking back at Senior, he left a lot of good things behind. Really, he ushered in one of the ages of tourism in Niagara Falls in the early part of the 1900s. Brought big headlines to the falls, and we're still trying to get, believe it or not, a statue of him somewhere in the park through one of his great-grandsons, Kip Finn.
On August 5th, 1951, William Redhill Jr. attempted to beat the Niagara Falls. Unfortunately, he lost his life. Interestingly, his father, Hill Sr., rescued folks from the Niagara River. On September 28, 1989, Niagara Falls, Ontario residents Peter DiBernardi and Jeffrey James Petkovich accomplished going over the falls as the first duo. I had the good fortunes of going to high school with Jeff Petkovich. In 1985, Steve Trotter successfully went over the falls in his pickled barrel device. 10 years later, he went over the falls again, this time with Laurie Martin, the first male-female duo. On June 5th, 1990, 28-year-old Jesse Sharp attempted to ride over the brink of the Horseshoe Falls in a kayak and unfortunately lost his life. 1985 and 1993, John Dave Monday became the first person to go over the falls twice in a barrel. The 56-year-old man accomplished this feat using a red and white homemade steel barrel that cost $16,000 to build. And then there is Nik Wallenda.
It was sort of a surreal feeling. Often when I get into that that moment where I'm about to make this walk, and that was certainly at that point the longest walk of my career. It was almost the highest walk of my career, but it was certainly the most highlighted walk of my career. And so there was certainly a lot of stress and a lot of pressure on me. But it seems like, you know, I still can remember being in the elevator at the Seneca Casino on the US side, going down, getting ready to get in a car to head over to get on that wire. You know, I try to relive those moments because it's such a unique spot. You know, no one in the world's ever walked directly over the precipice of Niagara Falls. We know the story of other wire walkers, and of course, Charles Blondin being one of the most renowned, walking downstream, but never walking directly over the precipice. And often when I do these walks, I want to enjoy it. I want to take it all in because, again, the opportunity is very, very few. As you know, probably I had to change the law in the United States that was over 100 years old and get legislation written to get permission, and then get the Parks Commission to agree to allow me to do it on the Canadian side, which was a major hurdle, which I was declined the first time I met, and you know, that whole process. But certainly that walk is what launched my career to become what it is today.
So Nik Wallenda came to see me about 10 years ago. I was a new mayor, and he came in with HBO and camera crew. And he came in and he sold me on a dream that he had from when he was a little boy. He'd come to Niagara Falls with his parents, and they realized nobody had ever in history walked across the Horseshoe Falls. It wasn't physically possible. And he always thought, one day I'd like to do that. So he came to me and said, this is my goal. And I knew it was very difficult. I knew others had tried to make it happen, but were not successful because it's an international crossing. And he came and said, you know, will you help me on my journey to make my dream come true? And I liked Nik. I liked what he stood for. He's a good human being, good family man. And I bought into his goal and his dream. So I said, yeah, I'm going to help you. So I worked with the MPP at the time. I had to work with a senator at the time. On both sides of the border. This was, of course, binational, so it took a lot of efforts to make it happen. And finally, Governor Cuomo gave us a 1-year window to get it done. So then I had to go directly to the Premier and the Minister of Tourism to make it happen. And it was not easy because at the time, the Niagara Parks Commission were adamantly opposed. The city of Niagara Falls, New York was opposed. I had a lot of challenges that were thrown our way. And Nik's attitude all the way through it to after was always never give up.
You know, I guess definitely not on Niagara Falls. I was just so tuned in and in the zone that I felt confident and good. And I had prepared so well for that, with fire trucks spraying me down and heavy wind machines, etc. So I felt that walk I felt really good about. And I would tell you the other walks as well. There are, you know, there are times where I get caught off guard, certainly getting hit with 50 or 48-mile-an-hour winds while crossing the Grand Canyon, 1,800 feet up. Certainly when I was walking across the Allegheny River in Pittsburgh and the wire was unstable under my feet and it started raining. Certainly in that volcano, when I was crossing the volcano in Nicaragua most recently, when I got hit with a gust of wind that was so powerful that it knocked me back and almost had to step backwards on that wire. Those moments are certainly moments of I don't want to say shock or panic because I always stay very in control, but it's certainly your heart jumps. But never has there been a moment where I've been up there like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? Again, because we do so much study, I have such an amazing team, but we do so much research leading up to these walks that generally I know pretty well what I'm going to be facing when I get on that wire.
So I was really proud to be a small part of making it happen in Niagara Falls as we made history. That day, we had about 150,000 people come down to the falls on both sides of the river to watch him do his historic crossing. Success has many fathers. And after it happened, boy, was there a lineup of people wanting to take credit for it. Even some of the people that were really opposed and being negative. And I guess, hey, that's life. That's the way it is. But not only did we have a massive turnout, we shut down the parkway, which was just amazing to see these massive crowds. It was a perfect night. We had all international media here from every corner of the globe. I can't tell you how many interviews I did. I ended up losing my voice at one point the day before. And I mean, they're from everywhere. Japan, China, Australia, UK, California, New York. They're from everywhere.
I remember the day when Nik was in town for his walk. I think it was 2012. And what struck me the most was how packed the city was for the event. So early in the day too. It was gridlock down by the falls. We had such a time getting a crew down there to get some coverage of the event. I think a better memory for me though was shortly afterwards, within the year, when Nik was the guest speaker at the mayor's prayer breakfast at Club Italia. We had a chance to speak to him one-on-one, and he even stuck around afterwards and took some pictures with our volunteer crew, which was wonderful. He was very approachable, very nice guy, and it was nice to have him to ourselves for a while to talk. But yeah, overall, it was a great event for the city.
The other thing that was really cool was the final outcome, and it was two main final outcomes. Number one, well, it was the biggest event that was happening on the planet that day, viewed by over 1 billion people in a 24-hour period, as he made history right here in Niagara Falls. And it started with a goal of a little boy with a dream, fulfilling his dream. And the second part was the lesson. And the lesson was, you never give up. It was an honor getting to work with him and get to know him, someone I consider a friend. And I know that him and I can text like instantly, as if no time had gone by since I've seen him. Yet it's been years since I've seen him. So I'm proud of the fact that we came together and we did something really cool.
When I'm not a psychologist, I'm directing films. And when I'm not directing films, I'm a psychologist. So who better to ask than yours truly as to why somebody would want to go over the falls in a barrel or walk across the precipice of the falls? And that's a really good question. I've been asked, does the person have a death wish? Is that all about an adrenaline rush? Interestingly, the great Sigmund Freud, the father of psychology and psychoanalysis, said that people are driven primarily by two types of instincts: the life instinct and the death instinct.
Any specific location, whether it be the Grand Canyon, I don't get a rush. I truly do it because I'm passionate about it. It's because it's hard to explain. When we have a family reunion, we get on the wire and have chicken fights. Every day I get on the wire, not because I have to, because I like to. And maybe that's a little overstatement. It's not every day, but it's generally 4 or 5, sometimes 7 days a week that I'm on that wire. And again, it's not that anyone's saying, hey, get on that wire. You got to get out there and practice. Although when I was younger, it was that way. But at this point, it's more about, it's just what I enjoy doing. In fact, I find peace when I'm on that wire rather than an adrenaline rush. It becomes I would say that politics go out the door, raising teenagers go out the door, any stress that I have, financial, marriage, doesn't matter. It's a peaceful spot for me. And that's where I find peace. So that is the reason why I enjoy being on that wire.
We opened up the gates for the falls because we typically divert 50% of the water to make electricity. Mm-hmm. And that night, because we had NBC there, we brought in auxiliary lights. That's some of the other residual benefits we learned from this, because when Nik did his event, well, now we've got high definition TV. So now we need better quality everything. So they brought in better quality auxiliary lighting on big posts. And we realized, wow, when they took the lights down, we thought it's so dark here. So then we led another charge to get new lights. So it cost $4 million. We had to raise money on both sides of the border to bring in new LED lights. We did a worldwide request for proposal. Finally, a company out of Japan and California came together to build them for us. And we've had people come from all over the world to see it, because before that, LED lights were not powerful enough to go that far. And with the mist, there's the ice, there's so many challenges. So since then, we've increased the light performance, the lumens, by like 300%. So it's so much brighter. So you get way better pictures now, and we can do so many more colors because it's LED, that we can do so many effects. And it's all because of Nik Wallenda. Like, he changed the way we look at the falls. The most fundamental thing we do here in Niagara Falls is come see the falls. And he helped us change the way that we look at it. So it's hard to believe after all these years, you think, well, what else could we do different? Well, he showed us another way.
So I certainly didn't write it to daredevils. Of course, there are very few of us, but there's a lot of other people, I believe, that are dealing with fear on a daily basis. In fact, when I wrote this book, it was prior to the pandemic, and I believed at that point much of the world was dealing with fear and gripped by fear. After this pandemic, or during this pandemic, I think there's so much more. I think it's 80 to 90% of people are dealing with fear on a daily basis. Fear of not just the pandemic, but fear of leaving their house, fear of what the future holds, financial fears. There are so many that come with it. So this book was really written to everybody. And what I did is I used the principles of what I do on the wire. And you know, a lot of it is just that internal dialogue. It's where we allow our mind to go. And it's funny, you asked a moment ago about you know, when I'm on that wire, is there ever a moment where I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? Or a panicking moment. But the reality is I have trained my mind to not allow it to go there. When I get hit with 48-mile-an-hour gust of wind over the Grand Canyon, instead of freaking out, I can say I've trained and prepared for this. So I try to counter that negative with positive, no matter what in my life. This morning, to be honest with you, I woke up and I was just almost feeling in just a weird state of mind. I had a couple emails that weren't very positive, and just and immediately I was laying in bed and I thought, you know what? I'm not going to allow my mind to go there. I'm not going to have a day like that. And I literally stopped that moment in its tracks. And that's something that I've been able to do because I've practiced for so long. I have, you know, leading up to walks, etc. I don't allow myself to freak out. You know, I could panic over that walk just thinking about walking across Niagara Falls. What's it going to be like in the middle? Am I going to be able to make it? No one really knows what those updrafts are like out there, etc. So I try to use that in every aspect of life. And that's really one of the key points in my book is really, you know, we need to control, we're in control of our minds and our minds are not in control of us. And we need to control where we allow our minds to go. And again, the way we do that is by practicing that. And it takes a while. And it's like when I train on that wire, I will trip, I will fall while training, but you know what, as long as I'm training, preparing, then when I get in the actual environment where I am 1,000 feet above the terra firma, I know that I won't trip and I won't fall.
I remember so vividly the day that Nik Wallenda walked over the Niagara Falls on a tightrope, that is the precipice of the falls. The reason I know it so vividly is because I was down there in the early hours of the morning, sipping on a latte and eating a scone. I remember literally almost touching the tightrope and almost vomiting in my mouth as I'm looking at this ginormous waterfall, thinking to myself, good luck with that, dude. Better you than me. You see, I'm a guy who loves waterfalls. I would never go over one that is in a barrel or walk over one. The extent that I go with waterfalls is probably standing underneath one. And even that could be perhaps risque depending on the strength of the water.
Nik Wallenda.
It's a story that begins many generations.
Generation way. There is no
This is an epic international event.
This is history in the making.
The High Wire. It's a line that defines Nik Wallenda.
Wow, that's amazing, that roar, that crowd.
Spanning a storied family history over 200 years and 7 generations.
What is the highest tightrope crossing that I've made in my entire career? Was it the Georgia Dome? Was it the Grand Canyon, Niagara Falls, or Times Square? The answer is the Grand Canyon. When I crossed over the Grand Canyon, I was well over 1,000 feet above the rocks below.
Throughout the years, there have been many who have tried to conquer both the Horseshoe Falls and the American Falls in their contraptions.
The last of the Niagara Daredevils was a man called Kirk Jones. He was an unemployed auto parts salesman from Michigan. And he went over in 2003 with nothing, no barrel. He had 2 winter coats on, and he must have missed the rocks because he survived. The Parks Police charged him with under the Daredevil Act, but he came back. He survived. He went on a bit of a circus tour in Florida, made a little bit of money out of it. Made the big mistake in 2017 of going in a large plastic barrel with apparently a boa constrictor, his pet boa constrictor, inside the barrel with him. My theory is that in the upper rapids, all the bouncing going on, the boa constrictor panicked and attacked Kirk, and he didn't make it either over the falls. He was out of the barrel. People saw the barrel go over the falls with no one in it. Later on, they found his body somewhere near Lewiston. So, Kirk Jones, sad story, the last of the Niagara Daredevils.
It was 1964. We were studying for our exams, last exams in high school, and someone said, well, let's take our books and we'll go up along the upper and we'll study. It was a beautiful summer day, and we looked up, and the visual was that the women that were along the shore were grabbing their children and they were crying. I remember some of the women were putting their hands in front of the eyes of the kids and running to the cars. So we ran towards the shoreline, and we saw this boat in distress. And I remember seeing on the side of the boat, it was called the Pink Lady. And it turned out that it was 2 couples from Buffalo that were out boating on a nice summer day. And obviously the motor wasn't strong enough to get them to shore. And we knew that they were in trouble, as did everybody else that was watching. I'm not sure. I think I was the one that suggested, let's go down further, because if they happen to come in closer, we might be able to help them. So we jumped in the car and we went down to the powerhouse just above the falls. And sure enough, the boat was coming. By this time, one of the ladies was screaming. And those screams I heard for the next 6 months in my head. I couldn't get them out of my head. And the boat was going down these little drop-offs, and on one of the drops, the boat went down and the prop hit and almost knocked the motor off the back. And now they were in panic mode, and now they were about maybe 300-400 feet from the shore, maybe 400 yards, I would say. And the boat turned over, and the next thing I saw were the two ladies who drowned immediately. The two ladies went over the falls. One of the fellows was closer to me, he went over, but the last fellow came right towards me, and I ran down to the bank, and he came within an arm's length. And I remember reaching my hand out, and we made eye contact, and he looked at me, and it was as if he was at a very calm state. And as he looked at me and I reached my hand out, he just went down in front of my eyes. And I never saw him again. And thinking there is nothing more powerful that I've ever experienced or saw in my life than that Niagara River.
I have a documentary right now on YouTube, and it's called At the Brink, a personal look at suicides over Niagara Falls. I think suicides at the falls is sort of one of these dirty little secrets we don't want to talk about. But there are 25 to 30 people annually, some 5,000 people over the years since the 1800s who have died by suicide by going over those falls. My documentary hopefully will bring awareness out about depression, how to help people who have mental health issues and succumb to the draw and the power of the falls. I also believe that the officials should perhaps do something about the railing at Table Rock House is less than 4 feet. I know you can't protect the whole river, but a lot of impulsive suicides go over that railing, 1 foot up on the stone wall, and you're gone.
A fishing expedition that my friend and I took in a small boat up around Navy Island. And when we left the island, being young and not too experienced, we made the mistake of not starting the motor before we pushed off. And as we're drifting out into the river, he kept pulling on the cord, and the motor would not start. And we started to pick up speed, and it got to the point that we got very scared. And he said, if this doesn't start on this next pull, we have to jump in and grab onto a rock. And all that flashed in front of me was going over the falls, which was a very real possibility, or being stuck on a rock if I was lucky enough to survive and waiting for help. And on that last pull, the motor started, and we went on a diagonal and made it back. And I swore at that time I would never go into the Niagara River again. That's a good ending.
So there you have it, folks, the Niagara Falls, the place where people have come over the centuries to test the limits of Mother Nature. Some, as I said, have succeeded, and some, well, they will still go down in the history books of having at least tried to beat the Niagara Falls.